Hello, everyone. So, as spoken about it earlier, the reason for today's live is very interesting. We're going to get an expert to join us and talk about all the things that you need to watch out for before you invest in a stock. So, it's going to be very technical. There's going to be a lot of information, and as requested by you guys, we are going to discuss how to choose a business, how to choose the promoters, what are the right things to look at, what are the red flags. And we're going to have our friend Mohit Gang of Moneyfront join in. Hi, Mohit.
Hey, hi, Sonia. Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too. How you been?
All good, all good. Hope you're keeping safe and fine.
Yes, absolutely. I think now this lockdown is, it's gotten into our DNA now. Everyone sort of made a
Absolutely.
routine working from home.
But but I saw you go to the studio last week.
Yeah, so now we are in rotation actually. So
Oh,
we have three teams, and one team goes to office and the other two stay at home. So we're kind of trying to, adapt to the new normal, social distancing, sanitizing, all of that.
yeah.
So
Interesting,
you're
interesting.
working from home now?
Completely. We were any which way as a digital platform, so it was never a difficult task for us to migrate.
Okay, great. So Mohit, without wasting any time, we planned this session. I mean, you came up with the idea, and I'm so grateful for that because it's been the most frequently asked question. What do you look at before investing in a stock or before investing in a business, right? I mean, there are a
Yeah.
lot of beginners who write to me, a lot of people who just don't know the sources of information. So let's start step by step. You begin, tell us when you invest in a stock or when you invest in a company, what are the two or three things that you look at?
Okay, so I think for the beginners or for the starters, from a pure retail standpoint, look, my personal advice to people who get into it for the first time is to adopt the mutual fund route or the PMS or AIF route through a professional fund manager. But if they really want to get into this line of stock picking and analyzing stocks by themselves, then that is what we'll try and cover through the session today as to what they can do and what they cannot and what ideally they should not do. The whole thing is there are 2 points to look at it. Which stock should I buy and for how long should I hold? We have to
Yes,
just answer these two questions, and I think we are through
absolutely.
with the session,
And I think
right?
it's the toughest answer, right? Which stock to buy. So,
Absolutely.
what are the? We'll start from the top, and you sent me a lot of pointers. You're having some. I think your phone is slipping off. Is it?
Yeah. I think it'll be fine now. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I know all of us. All of us are. This is new to all of us, so we are sort of a lot of
Yeah.
trial and error. So first, understanding of the business and its value chain, key products, markets, and how the value is being created. So how do you really pick a business and an industry?
Okay, look, so Sonia, you have complex businesses all around, and it's very difficult to analyze businesses who work on cyclical nature. So who are linked to commodities or who are linked to particular sources of income and which is sporadic in nature. So my first advice to anyone who is getting into this thing for the first time is to restrict himself to structural businesses which will continue for eternity. And the simplest way to look at it is what you do in your daily life. You get up, you do your brush, you take your bath. What all do you use? Are those going to expire ever in life? No, they'll keep continuing. You use some tech, you use some IT, use some IT infra, and the way you have been banking, the way you have been doing things, those things will never change. So your basic lifestyle, which is continued till now, till date, for last whatever 30, 40 years of your life, the way you can envisage that life going on for eternity, those are the industries which are the simplest to understand, and those don't have any cyclicality. So if I were to summarize, it's your financial industry, your consumption industry, and your IT industry. These are
Okay.
three perhaps the simplest ones to start with, and I'm not saying for a minute that you should not go into the other sectors, but these are the ones which will be consistent money making industries for a fairly long period of time.
So does it make sense? So you spoke about what you use in your daily life, right? But all of that is changing, like by the day. We used to use cars so frequently earlier. Suddenly there was the onset of Uber, Ola, so that changed. Now again, people are talking about personal mobility because they don't want to get infected. So how do you sort of decide which could be the industry which will hold forth for the next few years?
So look, that's a tricky one, and honestly, I think because of this pandemic scenario, we are all undergoing transformational change in the way we operate, we do our businesses, and there are new paradigms which are coming up altogether. For some time, it was looking as if travel was a big thing in the globally, and perhaps everything is now going out virtually, right? So there are few businesses which will change. However, as I said, the consumption business, you continue to consume your coffee, you continue to drink your Nescafe, you continue to use those livers product, you continue to use those Marico products. So those things will not die off, right? You
Yes.
continue to use your IT and tech more and more. So companies like Infosys, TCS, where the backbone is completely driven through IT, software, technology services, those businesses will last forever.
You
Banking,
continue to use even data more, right? So telecom companies
absolutely.
have been benefiting quite a bit. I mean, we've seen Bharti is actually the biggest Nifty gainer since the start of the lockdown. So with people
It
sitting at
is,
home,
but
more data consumption, yeah.
I have perhaps different views on it, and maybe we take it through the chain once we go through multiple factors. So my first point is you understand the business and its value chain as to what the business is doing, what are the key products, and which products contribute to the maximum sales of that business, right? So if let's say Maggie be the product for Nestle, how much is contribution from Maggie to entire sales of Nestle? And if you analyze that one particular product, will it like perhaps make or break the entire fortunes of Nestle or not, right? So you have to know what the company is into, what is the key business. That's the first starting point. And the second starting point is to know the quality of management, which is extremely critical. Trust me, businesses which last for decades and more are the businesses which are run by high quality, high integrity managements. And so look, there are these are all qualitative factors, but perhaps you could
Okay,
look
I
at
have
annual.
one. Sorry, I have one
Yeah,
question before we move to quality of the management. On the industry itself, now I believe personally that you should always stick to market leaders because, I mean, whether it's HUL, Asian Paints, TCS, Pidilite, Nestle, you spoke about, all of these companies are market leaders. Bajaj Finance, of course, Bajaj Finance now business model is only gotten, it's broken down for the time being. But when you stick to market leaders, what happens is in a very tough environment, you you're insulated because these are the guys who can actually stay afloat despite it being very hard.
absolutely.
Would you concur with that, that it's better to just stick to market leaders?
Absolutely. For beginners and starters, it is absolutely essential to stick with the market leaders. I'll just give you a small data point. Since the inception of Nifty, or let's say 500 top 500 companies, only 15% of the market leaders actually retain their position after a decade. There is a complete churn of market leaders also,
Yeah.
right? So 85% of the companies actually can't hold on to their pole positions. And so think of the second or the third competitor. They at times they are like completely wiped off. So look at the telecom industry. You don't know who the second or the third or the fourth competitor is perhaps in that industry, right? So if you stick to the market leader, you have all the chance to stay afloat and go on for decades, perhaps. So that's absolutely right strategy for starters.
Okay. So now Ojas has asked us a very important question. How does one access the quality of a management since this becomes a qualitative factor? Now, this is
Absolutely.
so important. Where do you get the data to find out that the management is high pedigree? There is no corporate governance issue. Where do you look for information like that, Mohit?
So look, I think you will have to go with some qualitative reading out here. You look at the annual reports of the company. Trust me, no website, no amount of data, no amount of any kind of discussion can help you more than the annual report. If annual report can't convince you, no research report can convince you, basically. And you have to look at the longevity of the management, what their remuneration packages are. Are they linked to company's growth? What their ESOP packages are? uh, how well are they deploying the capital structure of the company, which is absolutely essential. So are they using the cash for dividend payouts, for buybacks? Are they using it for let's say fresh acquisitions? So how well they are using the capital structure of the company is one key
But
parameter.
PS Sundar has pointed out a very important point, and thank you for pointing that out. Annual reports can be window dressed, right? So I mean, you obviously a management in its annual report is not going to put out negative information about themselves. Let's be honest about that. So how do
Absolutely.
you really get into how do you get into the granular details? How do you find out the dirt?
Look, I think it's more with experience and more with knowing the promoters of the company and what is their shareholding, what is their skin in the game. So you'll have to look at this thing. So some key negative indicators, perhaps, let's say if you find a lot of debt in the company. If the debt equity ratio is fairly high, let's say it's more than 2x or more than 3x, it will depend from industry to industry. But within the industry, if you find the debt or the leverage ratio is fairly high, that's a negative indicator of how the management is trying to perhaps run the company. One negative flag could be if the management is very flamboyant. You can see very flamboyant offices, or you can see unnecessary expenditures. So I think those are smaller bits and pieces you will have to gather through your own independent research and
But
perhaps
then for
reading out a
debt,
lot.
I mean, I'm just, trying to be the devil's advocate here. For debt, then there are some businesses that always need to take high debt, right? For example, infrastructure. How do you decide then? You look at the debt equity ratio, and what is the sort of red flag there? More than 2x, or, more than 1x, or does it depend from company to company?
It will depend from industry to industry, not so much from company to company. So definitely, if you are an infra industry, the debt equity ratios will be fairly high because you require a lot of capital to run those businesses. And typically, businesses try and raise debt capital to run for their functioning. So 2x, to my mind, greater than 2x is a red flag for sure. Ideally, for starters, for retail investors, it doesn't make sense to go into businesses or go into industries which will run that kind of debt equity ratio. Anything which is less than 1 up to 1 is fairly nice. Anything you can find less than 0.5, trust me, that's a fantastic. There is something right which is going on in that business, and you need to have a deeper look at other financial matrices.
So, one thing what I look at when I track a lot of companies, because of earnings, and we do track for television as well. One thing what I look at is I go to BSE. Whenever I find a company, I go to BSE. I open the last 3 years report P&L, and I look at what is the profitability of the company. Now, if I see that for the last 3 years the company has been loss making, that's a straight red flag for me. Whatever,
Absolutely.
however good the stock is, but if the company is loss making, it's doing something wrong. The industry may be wrong, the promoters may be wrong, whatever. So that is the big red flag for me. Are there any other red flags for you that you would sort of point out?
So look, that's one of the key indicators of judging how a company is doing, which is the consistency of returns and consistency of performance, right? So it's not good to have a 30-40% growth in 1 year and then suddenly taper out. What you need to look at is companies which have been growing revenue or sales for last 10 years consistently, and a real good benchmark out there is 10%, right? So you can take it at any number. You can take it for India at India's nominal GDP growth of 13-14% for last decade. But that's a fairly high number. And if you go and research out companies, you'll not find many names who've been consistently doing 15% growth year on year, right? But a 10% is a good benchmark to have. 10% sales growth or earnings growth year on year. Trust me, if you can find that consistency, which is very important, right? You can have extraordinary items sometime in some particular financial year, and that doesn't count for much. So you need to look at that trend, which is very important. That's
so let me
first
just paraphrase what you said so far for people who have missed out. So you've said that first red flag is high debt. Avoid companies that have high debt. How do you do that? You have to look at the debt equity ratio. If it's more than 2x, then it's better to avoid investing into those companies, especially in such a market. Second is consistency of performance. So, if a company is growing at a 10% compounded annual growth rate on the revenues, then that's something that consistently for the last 3 years, then that's something that perhaps can make the cut. If not, then you need to sort of look into it.
Yeah. It tells you that company is managing cycles better.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the company's, So if you look at 5-year cycles, then if the company is growing at a 10-year compounded rate over 5 years, then it's able to manage not just the peaks but the troughs as well. All right.
Absolutely.
The quality of the management. Before we move on, just one question on that. Any other avenues of any websites that you look at where you can sort of get to know more about what's happening with the management, corporate governance issues, etc.?
Look, so I think media and news channels are the first ones to bring it out. Honestly, you guys are the first one to bring out corporate governance issues. And in terms of websites, you will find research and data related websites, but management quality websites are not there so much in India, to be very honest. You have to look at daily. So look, you can know it from few companies. So when you look at Infosys, or when you look at let's say a Livers, or you look at a Marico, or you look at a Nestle or an Asian Paints, you know that management has been fantastic for years and decades put together, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
so there is that amount of trust which you can straight up repose on them.
Okay,
So
great. And now a lot of people are asking us about valuations, guys. That's the next big topic we're going to take.
yeah.
So valuations, right? Basic metrics, whether it's price to book, price to equity, return on equity. If you can just explain to us in layman terms, Mohit, what is price to equity? I mean, we all know it, but just to put it out there, what is price to equity? What is price to book? And what's the most important valuation that you look at?
Okay, so the most important valuation, I'll go with that first, which I would consider is return on invested capital, which is ROCE, or return on capital employed. To me, I think that's the holy grail of judging a business. And as Charlie Munger puts it very nicely, returns generated by a company's share price in the long term cannot be significantly more than the ROC which the company is generating. So if you take a 20-30 year kind of a time frame, if the ROC of a company is 10%, the returns generated will be in line with that, right? Having said which, PB ratios or the valuation matrices are more for timing purposes as to
So
when
this
to make an entry.
ROCE, so what is a good ROCE for a company to have? I mean, on an average, like, I mean, say, take an industry-wise FMCG if you take, what is a good ROCE that a company should have?
Okay, so look, there are three variables in ROC. ROC in crude format is EBIT upon your shareholders' capital plus debt put together, right? So you include equity plus debt and try and judge how well the company is deploying its capital and how productive the capital is. If you find an ROC greater than 15%, that's a good sign of a good business. Consistently, if a business can generate an ROC of over 15% for, let's say, a decade put together, I think you have it. You should just go for that business. Now, there are three parts to it. One is there are businesses who have high earnings growth, basically, and very low capital requirements. So a company like an HUL or a company like an Nestle for that matter, right? So they don't have to deploy too much capital now. Their massive infrastructure, the sales and distribution, their moats are all established in the business. So their ROCs are fairly high, very, very high ROC businesses these are, right? And then you have businesses which require a lot of capital to generate growth. These are like your banks. HDFC Bank, they require fresh capital for their lending requirements. All your banks, NBFCs, they require a lot of capital, but their growth rates are tremendous, right? So they require, so that's the second category of businesses, and you should focus on only the first and the second. The third one
Okay,
is
so
this.
someone's just pointed out a couple of questions are coming in on ROC. Mayur says, I don't know ROC, it's confusing for me. I'm still unable to understand ROC. So basically, ROC is return on your capital employed, which is your simple terms, it's your earnings, that your earnings before interest and tax, your EBIT, upon the capital that you put into the business, right?
Absolutely.
That's the simple definition of ROC. And a business that has above 15% ROC is it's prudent to invest in such businesses. Now, where will you get to see this ratio? Is it in annual reports, or do you look at it elsewhere? I know that you find it on the BSE website as well.
Absolutely. So there are many websites. Look, if you can't compute it, and honestly, I think computations can get tough at times because there are multiple variables to be put when you're computing the shareholders' equity plus debt and everything. So what you should do is there are multiple websites which will give you this ratio. You will so there is a website called Trendline.com. There's a so even on Money Control, even on Equity Master. Yeah. So there are multiple websites which will give you these ready reckoners. And all the ratios are all published, debt equity ratios, your ROCs, your sales growths, your net profit margins, they're all published. All you need to do is intelligently analyze an industry, pick up the industry first, see the 3 or 4 companies, the leaders perhaps, the first 2 or the third name, and not beyond that, and then analyze within that.
Gauri has asked us, what is the difference between ROC and ROI, return on interest and return on capital employed?
So return on interest is maybe perhaps I think what she needs to ask is ROE versus ROC.
Return on equity.
Return on equity. So there are 3 parameters: return on equity, return on capital employed, and return on assets, ROA. So return on equity is when you only consider equity capital. In layman's term, return on capital employed is when you consider equity capital plus debt and return on assets is when you consider total assets, right? So these are used for different industries, but perhaps ROC is all permeable. So once you put the filter of ROC, I think you're broadly okay to analyze most of the industries.
Okay, got that. So, in valuations, the most important thing to look at is the return on capital employed. It's basically what you earn upon divided by the capital that you put into the business. It's only the assets, right? X of liabilities. You don't include the liabilities in this ratio. Yes. And what is the next thing? I mean, we are getting some questions on PE as well. What about PE ratio?
Yeah,
Price?
okay. So I'll come to the valuation matrices. Look, so I'm not a very big fan of valuation matrices because if you get the business right, which is that if you get the management, understanding of the business, consistency of performance, which is sales growth, plus the ROC parameter right, then what level do you enter in will perhaps matter quite little in when you consider that you're investing for 20-25 years, right? So you investing perhaps for posterity, but still. PE is your price to earnings ratio, which is your market price of the stock, which is quoting right now, the current market price upon the earnings per share. So earnings per share EPS number you will find in company's annual report on all the websites and everything. So that's a fairly easy number. Now PE has to be seen from industry to industry. You can't put the parameter of PE across industries. So for FMCG, PE trust me, for let's say companies like Nestle quotes at 77-80 times price to earnings multiple, Livers quotes at 60 times price to earning multiples, Asian Paints again a crazy multiple. Banks, private sector banks will quote at a multiple of 15, 16, 13 times. SBI will quote at a multiple of 9, 10 times. So there are different industry benchmarks. For financial industries, it's better to look at price to book ratio. Why?
Okay, yeah, right.
Because their balance sheet is all they have, the book value of the balance sheet. Finally, it's comprised of what people have given them as FDs, right? Fixed deposits with the banks. And that FD is fairly liquid. For 0.5% rate, one FD can move from one bank to other bank. So what is the book value of the bank is more critical. So price to book is a more prudent assessment of a bank. Out there, the ratios for PSU banks will be like 0.5 to 1% price to book. For private banks can be 2 times, 3 times, depending on the brand and how well the book is managed and the quality of management. And HDFC can quote at 3 times price to book or 2.5 times price to book. So that's the rough benchmark. So if you find an NBFC which is quoting at 10 times price to book, there is something wrong. Trust me, when HDFCs of the world are quoting at 4 times price to book in good markets, you can't have whatever that NBFC is doing right, perhaps in terms of growth and everything, but quoting at 10, 15, 20 times price to book is not realistic, right?
So
Similarly,
how does one calculate the book value, the price to book ratio?
Look, so these are all fairly, it can get fairly technical if we get into all this. The book value per share, ideally, these ratios are all available, Sonia. So you go on any website.
And I think on Screener.in, on Money Control, on BSC,
Absolutely.
you have all these.
For starters, even Money Control is great. Price to book and PE ratios of the company and their industry benchmarks are all given out there with the basic details. So I think that's a good starting point. And then you can go on to screeners, as you said, Equity Master, Trendline, and there are multiple other websites to assess those.
So what else? We've done valuation. Anything else in valuation that you want to cover? You covered ROC.
We've covered debt to equity ratio. One last thing which I would like to highlight, and which is one of the perhaps biggest indicators of a good company, is the free cash flow position of the company, or what is the cash generating capability. Is the company generating free cash? Right. So you see companies like Infosys, right? And I'm perhaps not advocating a particular stock out here, so please take that as disclaimer. And I'm just quoting these as examples. But they're sitting with such hefty cash on their balance sheet, right? That gives management flexibility in bad times to buy businesses, to expand businesses, to go for vertical, horizontal integrations of businesses, create more value chains, and that's a sign of a great business. That by not deploying additional capital. With the same amount of capital, they have been able to generate free cash flow. So dividend yields are fairly high. So if you find a stock which is giving you a good dividend yield year on year, that's sure sign of a good stock with good cash flow positions. And if other matrices add up, then yes, you are in for a good stock.
And free cash flow, where do you see once again in the on these websites itself, BSC, etc.?
Yeah, you will find there are these websites which will give you. So Trendline will give you that, Equity Master will give you that. So look, we have a paid subscription of Bloomberg and few other paid sites. So perhaps those are not the right indicators, and I've not been much other than my own website, Moneyfront. I don't go to many other websites. But yeah.
You know,
Uh,
I have a question. Sorry, because I'm getting a lot of queries, so I thought I'll just address them one by one. But first, as someone rightly pointed out, I don't know who it was. Someone said, yeah, I think Vineet has said that P's are calculated based on past earnings and future earnings. The problem is in such a market, no one knows what future earnings are going to be.
Absolutely.
You know, so how important do ratios become at a time like this? I mean, do they
So
have any importance at all?
as I told you, valuation ratios are good for making a right timing call, but perhaps not if you're investing for 2-3 decades. And honestly, I would right now we are discussing of investments for perhaps children and grandchildren out here. So my whole point is valuation matrices are important, and you can accurately assess a P basis last 4 quarters earning. But projected earnings are all very shaky. In this time, I don't know what the earnings for this year will be for Sensex or Nifty companies. Honestly, I think there is a degrowth which is certain to come. Uska intensity and magnitude, no one knows. So it's very difficult to assess the earnings futuristically. Though all the research houses and brokerage houses will give you estimates of earnings, you can go with that and take a calculated call on that. But perhaps past uh, uh, historical P is a better parameter
Way
to
to
judge.
assess. Okay, so you've given us a lot of important, parameters to look at. Know the quality of the management. It should not debt equity ratio should not exceed 2x. Return on capital employed should be more than 15% for a company. The price to book ratio, I mean, it's different for different industries, but ballpark anything that you think is a good price to book ratio that one should work with.
Sonia, so look, price to book actually has to be seen as that is the value you would love to buy a company at. So maybe enterprise value is a better number for that, but price to book is what is the intrinsic worth of that business at cost price, right? And for banks, honestly, this ratio is more used for banks. For banks, for private banks, anything up to 2.5 is great. For PSU banks, sub 1 is the standard normal norm. 0.5 से नीचे actually are most of the PSU banks which are quoting there, the smaller ones, but those are avoidable zones. To my mind, honestly, I think all PSU companies should be avoided for investments.
Yes, I was going to say that. I was going to say that, in such a time, just avoid PSUs entirely. I mean, this is a very challenging time for all companies, and B, at a time like this when PSUs are already bleeding, you don't want to sort of burn your fingers in this situation. Okay, we are getting a lot of queries, so Mohit, we're going to take some queries, but before that, anything else that you've left out in terms of what are the key parameters to work with? We've covered most of it. Technological disruptions or changes in competitive dynamics being in favor of the company you're looking at. This is one thing that you pointed out to me. Take us through that.
So look, that's a very important point, honestly, and I think telecom, none other than telecom, is the biggest example of that thing. You've got to be cognizant about technological disruptions which can completely challenge your industry, right? And perhaps telecom is also one of the key industries where you see that ROCs are extremely poor, extremely poor. It's a capital guzzler business. There's so much of capital required in that business. To just give you an example, in 2002, there were 7 lakh subscribers in the whole country put together. In 2017, there were 120 crore subscribers in the whole country. Still the market leader, Bharti, from a huge profit of 2000 earnings in 2002, ran into losses in 2017. Right. So volume growth perhaps can't be a single indicator, or the massive market size can't be a single indicator in these kind of things. A technological disruption. So 3G came, 4G came, Jio perhaps completely revamped the entire technology and the entire game in this sector. So you have to be aware of disruptions which can break or make your segment. There has to be a moat. As Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger always says, that your business has to carry a moat, and that moat has to be sustainable across market cycles. And that's why consistency of performance is of
very
paramount importance.
Okay, absolutely. So Vinay has written to us, how can one know the demand supply ratio and also the market share of a company? Vinay, you can get the market share of a company on the company website itself, or in its annual reports, in its quarterly press releases. And it's so very important to track the market share. And once again, I reiterate that just stick to market leaders. If you are a long-term investor, you'll never go wrong with market leaders. Trust me, because if people stop painting their houses, at least 10% people will paint their houses and choose Asian paints over, say, Shalimar paints or a Berger paints. So people will prefer, because they know that if they go to Asian paints will have high safety standards. The people who come to paint will have social distancing norms. I mean, this is not a plug on Asian paints or anything. I'm just giving you an example. But that's why it's always better to choose market leaders in an environment like this. Also, yeah, okay. So before we take questions, and a lot of people asking me for multi-baggers from you, so I'm not going to let you go without asking you that. We're going to do a quick rapid fire as well. But Mohit, anything else that you want to tell us? If you are an investor, what should one be looking at?
So look, I think that is what it is, and I'll just sum it up from a newsletter of Warren Buffett. Basically, that you have got to look for 4 things: businesses you understand, favorable long-term economics in this business, which is consistency across market cycles, able and trustworthy management, which is of paramount importance, and sensible price tags. Right. So perhaps if you cover these 4 points, I think you will find good businesses. For starters, restrict yourselves to financials, consumption, IT. Those are not cyclical. Those are like long-term businesses. And when you invest, look for something which you can pass on as legacy to your children. So that should be a holding period.
All right. So let me just try and summarize what all Mohit has spoken about, and then we'll take a lot of questions as well. The first thing is, know the quality of your management, know the quality of the business, the market in which the business operates, the market share. It has to be a market leader or at least high amount of market share for you to invest. Stay away from companies that have high debt. The debt equity ratio should not be higher than 2x. The consistency of a performance. So if the company is growing at a compounded growth rate of 10% in revenues, then that is a green signal for you to invest into. Another green signal is the return on capital employed has to be more than 15%. That is the holy grail on judging how good a company is. Then the price to book ratio for, say, banks, for example, should be about above 2.5 times. It should be a company that has positive free cash flow. If that is the case, of course, in this environment, things are tough. But if they have positive free cash flow, then that is a green signal once again. Now, let's start taking some questions. And before that, I'm going to take a quick rapid fire with you, Mohit, before we go to questions. Since a lot of people are asking us about multi-baggers, you give me 1 multi-bagger or 2 multi-baggers or 2 stocks that you like for the long term.
Look, so that's a very, very tricky call, honestly. I think I will, in the current environment, I subscribe to the philosophy of going with market leaders. I'll go with perhaps an RIL, and I will go with TCS, and I will go with a Kotak Bank, and I will go with Asian Paints and ITC. So those are my picks across sectors. I can't go with one name.
Okay, guys, so you asked for one multi-bagger. He's given us 4. He likes RIL, TCS, Kotak Mahindra Bank, and Asian Paints, and one more you said, right?
Asian Paints and ITC.
And ITC. Okay, got that. So those are the 5 stocks. What about sectors? What are the key sectors you think that could be the sunrise sector for tomorrow? I mean, telecom was the sector to get into so far this year. For the rest of the year, what do you think?
So look, I'd refrain from going for a very short term or a year kind of a call. However, I think pharma looks extremely promising given the way, given the current scenario and the current global environment in which we are talking. Though there has been a significant run up in pharma stocks also for last couple of months, but still there is a lot of value because pharma has come out of underperformance for last 4-5 years per se. However, people have to take cognizance that pharma is always born with risks on regulatory front. So one US FDA ruling somewhere can actually ruin your returns for years put together, right? But having said which, yeah, pharma looks great. You look at companies like Sun Pharma, great ROCs, great free cash flows.
Okay, great. Someone's asking us what is the future of insurance sector, and this is an important question because
Yeah, yeah.
as safety and health picks up, people are so concerned about their future. It's logical to assume that people will buy more insurance. So, do you like insurance stocks, life insurance companies, general insurance? Your views here?
So look, this general life insurance and AMC companies perhaps have taken a lot of interest in the market. One good part about them, and again I go back to the prime reason of very high ROCs. If you look, they don't have to deploy additional capital to generate more revenues, right? It's a distribution business, and additional sales force can give them multifold revenues basically. So the ROCs are very high in these businesses, and but they are also quoting at very high multiples, perhaps factoring in the growth. So market is already factoring a lot of growth from these companies, but they are great businesses and there's a lot of potential in this country. So yeah, I'm quite bullish on insurance per se.
Okay, you're quite bullish on insurance. A lot of people have been asking us about any books that you would recommend investors to read, for beginners, for say college students who are looking to get into investing. Any top books on the top of your mind that you like?
You got to start with Intelligent Investor from Benjamin Graham. Nothing can beat him, and nothing can beat his philosophy. And the simplistic version in India, I would say, try Coffee Can Investing. It's very simple. It's a breezy read, and it can be good for starters.
Okay, so Coffee Can Investing and Benjamin Graham. These are two, books that.
Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. I think that's my first book. Yeah.
I read that book a long time ago, actually.
Yeah, it's like
Investing is a very nice book. It has a lot of good examples of companies that have the moat and sort of stood the ground for many years. All right, and how much importance do you give to technicals? Nilesh has asked us. So you spoke about fundamentals, but what about technicals?
That's a different line. So T20 and test matches are two different kind of formats, honestly. But just to give you an example, and I quote it quite often, if you see Dravid and Sehwag, the two players, and not many people know it, but Dravid beats Sehwag in all three formats in terms of averages, not just in test and one day, but even in T20. So a good stock is a good stock, whatever be the format. But technicals go only if you have a month, 3 month, 6 month, 1 year kind of a trading thing, and go with your tactical portfolio, which you are okay to lose. And out there, then it's a very different discussion, Sonia. So you got to see charts and patterns and liquidity and other things.
Okay, all right. Let's just take a few more questions before we end. We're getting a lot of questions coming in. What works in the longer run, technicals or fundamentals? I think fundamentals works in the longer run, definitely.
Absolutely.
Because, they say 90% of technical experts don't make money in the market who trade. That is, 90% of traders don't make money. There's just a lot of, uncertainty over there. What if the balance sheet and profit and loss statements are fishy? You never know what's fishy from the annual reports too. Many a time auditors have failed to analyze. That's a very, very important question. Absolutely. A lot of times with a lag, auditors raise red flags when it's too late. How do you avoid a situation like that as an investor?
Look, so if you go with market leaders, Sonia, and which you have also been saying, right, they have stood the test of time for decades put together, right? So those top banks in the country, those top FMCG companies, those top IT companies, they've stood the test of time. Their management has been proven, has had proven track record. When you go to small caps, that's where the problem arises. You don't know what the promoter is thinking behind his statements, and there's no magic wand out here. Sometimes you get beaten down and then only you learn from experience, but you have to just read more, know more about management, go through the balance sheets and see for consistency. One big red flag which I missed out previously, if the company has a lot of holding companies, a lot of small subsidiaries, intercompany transfers, and those are all smaller red flags which you have to, if the promoter is taking out a lot of cash, those are few red flags which you have to look for, but there's no magic.
That's an important point. Someone's asked us also, how do you read the cash flows in a company, cash flow statements, to understand the growth in cash flow over the years? Where do you access, how do you track cash flows of a company, and how do you get to know where the promoters have sort of siphoned off money, they've routed money to other subsidiaries? Where do you look for that information?
So look, cash flows you will find in annual reports. So that's there. You will find cash flows from operations, cash flow from financing activities, and investing activities. So that's there, and all three cash flows are fairly well defined now. So that information you will find. Promoter's salary is also published. That's a known data. Basically, you can figure it out from BSE websites and declarations out there, and you can see what an average guy earns out there in that kind of an industry and what the promoter. If you find that the ratio is very high, very steep, then you know for a fact that promoter is taking out extra amount of money. But I think skin in the game, pledged shares, those are few indicators which you have to browse through when you're looking for all these factors.
Okay, one more good question coming in from Mr. Shah. Booking profits versus reinvesting again from one stock to another. Which is better, especially in this environment?
Honestly, I think that's the whole problem. What people do is cut the flowers and water the weed, basically, which should ideally not be done in investing. Which is, once you have the flowers, you have to let it bloom, basically. So you have to put in more money behind your winners, and you have to cut the wrong positions. That's how investments is. But unfortunately, people book profits from where they are making money, and they average out prices where they're losing money, which is exactly the opposite of what needs to be done. If you're buying for eternity, if you're buying for long term decades, you need not be booking out profits if you've taken the right calls. Basically, all businesses go through cycles, and I think you have to be confident about your choices. Once you've analyzed all the parameters, there's no reason for you to come out. The holding period, as Warren Buffett says, has to be eternity.
Okay, all right. We've gone on for a very long time, almost 45 minutes, and we've taken up a lot of your queries. Thank you guys for joining us. We're going to let Mohit go now. Mohit, thank you for this session. It was very enlightening. I understood a lot of these simple concepts. I know these concepts are simple, but sometimes you need somebody to put it out there, and once again make you understand the very basics of investing, which sometimes we tend to forget. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'll leave with one thought for the day, and that is a very famous saying from the Bible, which says that a good man leaves an inheritance not just for his children but his children's children, right? And that's what you got to do with your stocks. You got to buy it not just for your children but for your children's children, and that's my favorite saying in investing. So I'll leave the audience with that thought.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that. So leave enough wealth not just for your children but for your grandchildren as well. That's the kind of aim that you should have. Okay, thanks a lot, and you guys have a good weekend. It's actually Monday long weekend, so we resume work tomorrow. But until then, thanks a lot, Mohit, for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.